Okay, let's come back. If you can hear me, clap your hands once. If you can hear me, clap twice. This is an amazing, smart audience. Well done. So how did that feel? How did connecting feel?
Good.
Great, great. Those moments of connection were few and far between, so we need to seize those and grab onto those. And that sort of dovetails us right into what we are here to talk about today. Now, to set up the conversation that we're going to have, I need to tell you a little bit about my background. One of the really cool jobs that I had was I worked for an organization that was an HR technology company, a software company that built employee feedback tools. So the flagship of these tools was an employee survey product, employee engagement survey. And that survey, one of the things that they used, or one of the business lines that we used that survey for, was a best places to work. We used it to kind of be the research engine behind a best place to work program. And we had 50 different programs at the time across the US that we were supporting, which meant that we were collecting literally hundreds of thousands of survey responses each year. And each year, at the end of the year, we would take all of that data, and one of our data scientists would take it and they would go through it and they would do an analysis to see, what were the sort of top drivers, what were the things that were most engaging employees, what were the things that were driving satisfaction, and then we would produce a report. And that report would include a top 10 list of the biggest drivers of engagement and satisfaction for the previous year. I tell you all of this because during my tenure there, I led the Best Places to Work team for 3 years. And during my tenure there, every year when we did this report, I started to notice something. I started to notice that at the top of the top 10 list, there were some things that came on and off the list every year, right? As economic conditions changed, as things were shifting around, there were things that moved on and off the list, but there were some things that were always there. And that became kind of curious to me. I'm like, okay, these seem to be pretty consistent. I went and started looking at our older reports that happened before I was there, and those same things were on those top 10 reports. And then I started looking at other data sets from other companies and other research projects, and those same things were there. And they were things like this. I want to feel valued. I want to feel appreciated. I want to feel cared for. I want to trust the people I work with and know that I am trusted. Now, if you've done work with employee engagement, or if you're an employee engagement geek like I am, this isn't probably particularly surprising to you, right? We know that feeling valued is important. We know that some of these things are important. But what struck me was this. If you take that list of things, if I take those 4 things and I wrote them down on a piece of paper, just those 4 statements, and I handed you that piece of paper without any context of what I was talking about, and asked you, like, what are we describing here? What are we talking about here? Very good. The first thing would not be, obviously we're talking about work. You would say, that's probably talking about some kind of relationship. I heard someone say spouse. And that's when it hit me. It hit me like a lightning bolt. That employees experience work as a relationship. For employees, work is a relationship. Now, if you think about let's think about the most significant or important relationship in your life. Think of somebody who is really important, your spouse, your best friend, significant other, maybe a sibling. Bring that person to mind, and I want you to think about that relationship when it's really healthy, when it's positive, when it's in a good place. If I were to ask you to describe that relationship, what impact it has on you, what you get from that relationship, what would you say? My guess is the list would sound a lot like what I just had up on that screen, right? This person really appreciates me, and there's deep trust here. I really trust this person. I know they care about me, and I care about them. So work is a relationship for the employee. And employees, as employees, we need the same things from work that we need from any other important relationship in our life. And it's hard to argue that work isn't perhaps one of the most important relationships in our life when you consider the amount of time we spend at work and the amount of our identity that is wrapped up in our work. Pretty important relationship. And I think this begins to explain why we have traditionally had such a tough time engaging and retaining people up to this day. And that's because most employers still today think about and treat work like a contract with the employee. We offer you a paycheck, you give us work product and time in exchange. And if you think about the majority of our management and HR processes, most of them are designed to enforce the contract, to make sure we are getting our money's worth out of those people. This is fundamentally why we have things like job descriptions and performance appraisals and policy manuals and performance improvement plans. Like, that's why we have many of those things. And this approach has yielded some impact when it comes to efficiency and throughput, right? We've seen some of the impact. Here's the problem. It is a terrible approach to relationship building. Right? Imagine being in that marriage where your spouse rarely, if ever, tells you or shows you that they care about you, but frequently reminds you how well you are, or likely are not, living up to your spousal obligations to them. And I apologize if I just described your marriage. I was not intending to bring up a sore subject. That is a different seminar altogether. The point is, this is not a recipe for a happy relationship, right? This is a recipe for divorce. And this is the reality that so many of our employees live in on a day-to-day basis. So why are we so surprised when people continue to break up with us and go in search of a better relationship where they will be treated better? If we are to break this cycle, then we need to, it jumped way ahead. We need to move beyond this contractual way of treating work. We've got to tear up the contract, burn it, throw it away, and start treating work like the relationship that it is with employees. If you want to engage and retain and elevate the performance of your people, then what we need to do is abandon study of all of these workplace best practices of the past, which are, by the way, all anchored on work as a contract model, and instead start studying what makes healthy relationships work and bring that into how we show up as leaders, how we design work in our organizations. So let me check in with you quickly. If you are on board with treating work as a relationship and not a contract, let me hear you say, "Oh yeah." Oh yeah. All right. Generally aware. I'm not convinced. One more time. Let me hear you say, "Oh yeah." Oh yeah. Okay, now I feel comfortable moving on. All right. Let's fly forward. All right, so what we're going to do today, the good news is about this is that while we have been studying workplace best practice, there have been psychologists and therapists and academics studying relationships to understand what makes relationships work. What are the ingredients in a healthy, positive relationship? And so what we're going to do with our time today is I'm going to share with you a model of a healthy relationship, the ingredients that are required, that are based on this research, and then how we bring that to work, what that looks like, some advice, some insights, some tips that you can use to start making this shift. You ready? All right. So the first element of a healthy relationship, the first ingredient, is appreciation. We know this as humans. We crave acknowledgement and validation from other people, right? We want to feel seen and valued in our relationships. And if we're totally honest, we're not really great at this. We're not great at appreciation often in our personal lives, and we don't get a whole lot better at it at work. I would say we often get worse. And this is not a new problem. This is not a new phenomenon. How many of you have heard of or read the book, How Full Is Your Bucket? You remember this? Some of you having a throwback. I see a few, not many hands. How Full Is Your Bucket is a book that was published 20 years ago, so I'll forgive you for that. It's old school. 20 years ago, it was written by Don Clifton and Tom Rath. Don Clifton was the founder of Gallup, the Gallup organization. They wrote this book because they had millions of employee survey data responses, and in those responses, one of the most troubling findings that they were wrestling with was that 65% of the employees they surveyed said they had received 0 moments of positive recognition in the last year. Now let me say that again. 65%, that's 2/3 of employees, said they'd received exactly 0, not 1, not a few, not hardly any, 0 moments of positive recognition in the past year. That's startling. And it seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it? They say, like, that can't be possible. But I think it is. And there's a simple explanation as to why. Now, when we look at the traditional kind of work as a contract model, and we think about how we tend to think about employee performance, it starts to reveal itself. So now, if I took the employees at your organization, if you had a big enough organization, or if I took all the employees at all your organizations, and we charted out their level of performance against average, against expectation, right? What we expect of them. If we charted out their level of performance, we would end up with something like this, a bell curve, right? Most, the biggest number towards average, and then there's some that are really high performers, some that are really low performers, right? That's how it would distribute. That's the distribution. Now, in our traditional model of management, we have been told and trained to focus on 2 groups of people on that curve. We've been told to put our attention on 2 groups of people, to put appreciation and attention towards 2 groups. What are they? What's the number 1 group that we make sure we pay attention to? High performers, of course. We love those people. Don't want to lose them, high performers. Where else does our attention and time tend to be focused? Low performers. Does anybody notice a problem? Vast majority of people are right in the middle. And their experience of work every day is that they show up or they log in, they do their work, they meet expectations, they give their best often. They do what you ask them to do, and then they go home or they log off and they're not sure anybody even noticed that they were there. That's the cycle that we're trying to break. And this is what How Full Is Your Bucket was all about 20 years ago. And the solution they offered 20 years ago is just as relevant today as it's ever been. What they said is that this is about going back to the basics. It's about going back to understanding what we crave, that acknowledgement and that validation and feeling seen. And it's about creating more positive moments. And they went to neuroscience and they said, what they've learned in neuroscience is that our brains can interpret 20,000 individual moments every day. 20,000, it's amazing. Majority of those are emotionally neutral. They don't feel positive or negative. Some are emotionally positive, they're connected to a positive emotion, some are emotionally negative. And they say an optimal experience, when we feel really positive about our experience, is when we have more positive than negative. So like for today's keynote, at the end of it, if you feel like it was a positive experience, that's because you had more positive moments in this keynote than negative. I'm not even going to talk about the other, because as much as Alex loves feedback, I do not. I only love positive feedback, if I'm totally honest. But I'm trying to create positive moments, right? This is a very simple thing. It seems very obvious, and it is a very simple thing, and I'd like to prove to you how simple it is. So I want to acknowledge you. Right, at some point, not that long ago, you made a decision to show up today, to be here, to invest in you, to invest in your career, to invest in the important work you do. And you should be acknowledged for that. So what I would ask you to do just very quickly is acknowledge one another. Give the people at your table a fist bump just to say, I see you and thank you for showing up today.
Good job.
All right. Simple. Cost me nothing. That took about 20 seconds. What did you hear as we did that? Laughter. What did you feel? Happy. Energy. What did you see? Smiles. It's that easy. That's what they said. This is such a simple transaction. We need to be about the business of creating more positive moments at work. So what does that look like? As a manager, as a leader, it's about thinking about how we can create more positive moments. It can be as simple as, I was a high five manager back in the day when I worked in an office with a team. Now, high fives, I know now we have all of germ confusion and COVID, whatever. So now we're fist bumping, whatever it is. But what I have learned is high fives, fist bumps, it doesn't matter. Like if you just randomly walk up to someone on the street and offer a fist bump, about 100% of the time they'll look at you like you're crazy for a second, but then they'll smile. At work, you offer to give somebody a random fist bump in the hall, they will smile. Right? Positive moments are that simple. It's also as simple as saying thank you. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you showing up. I notice you. I see you. It's reaching out and saying hi. And so it's simple things. So creating more positive moments as a manager, as a leader is key. At a team level, one of the things I would offer is that when I was doing research for Unlocking High Performance, I was profiling all these high-performing cultures and best places to work. And the most common practice that I encountered in all of the interviews was that these organizations had formally put shout-outs or some kind of formal recognition exercise into every team meeting. At the beginning, at the end, they would take time just to go around and verbalize appreciation for one another, to do shout-outs. It's a simple way to amp up the positive and also to role model what effective recognition and appreciation looks like. So if you're ready to amp up the appreciation at work to build better relationship, let me hear you say, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. The next element, why does this keep doing it? It's jumping. The next element is acceptance. Next part of a healthy relationship is acceptance. Now, if I were to ask you to describe to me your best friend, right, your bestest bestie in the world, we sat down, had a conversation. Fairly early in that conversation, one of the things you would likely say to me in describing your relationship with this person is, I can really be myself with this person. Right? They've seen the good, they've seen the bad, they've seen the ugly, and they embrace it all. Right? They don't try to change me, they don't judge me, they just take it all. And because of that, you can show up fully in that relationship with them. And if we want to have the kind of workplaces where people can be all in, where they can give their best, we have to create an experience of work in that work relationship where employees feel like they are embraced for who they really are. Not who we wish they were, who we want them to be, who they really are. And there's data that suggests the more authentic I feel I can be at work, the more engaged I am likely to be. And this is a broad conversation, right? There's a lot of layers to acceptance and inclusion, but where it starts, I believe, is at a very basic level, which is getting connected. And I hearken back to an early point in my career where I went to work for a sales recruiting organization. And it was a really, really, really dysfunctional workplace. I could tell you stories for hours about things that happened at that place that were not okay. I should have left, right? Should have left. It was bad management, the office was terrible, our tools were terrible, our training wasn't very good, and yet, the owner of this organization did one thing well. He understood one thing, and I think it was a result of he grew up in sales and he understood the power of being with people, socializing, spending time together. And so one of the things we did is like every week he would create some kind of a sales incentive for the whole office. There's 20-ish of us, maybe 30 at times. And if we hit this goal, right, scheduled number of interviews, closed certain number of deals, whatever it was, as long as we hit it, then we would like shut the office down at noon on Friday or 3 o'clock on Friday, and we'd go do something. We'd go play putt-putt golf or ride jet skis or something, right? All kinds of fun stuff. And so we spent a lot of time together. And as a result of that, I stayed in that dysfunctional environment for a long time. I think I still have a little PTSD, to be honest. I stayed way longer than I should, and that ended up benefiting that owner. Because for the first 7 months of my time there, I was terrible at my job. It took me a long time to figure it out. I don't think I made one placement in my first 7 months. Now, they weren't paying me hardly anything, so they let me stick around. I kept showing up. But then in the 7th month, something clicked. I don't know what happened, but I went from the lowest performer to one of the top performers in the space of 2 months. And then for the next 2 years, I was one of the top 2 performers in that office. And that owner made a pile of money off of the commissions that I brought in during that, or the placements I brought in during that time. And that the only reason that happened, because anybody in their right mind would have probably left, was because of the connection. Those people, we spent so much time together that I became friends very quickly with them. And I didn't want to leave my people. I felt accepted. I felt like I belonged in this group of weirdos, right? All of us. And so I couldn't leave. I didn't want to leave. And then eventually it clicked. And so what's going on here? Well, back in 2012, my colleague Joe Gerstant and I published a book called Social Gravity that was all about relationships and the power of relationships. And in that book, we talked about this force called overlap. And the thing is, if you and I don't know each other, we've never met, we haven't exchanged any information, we've never done anything together, there's no overlap in our relationship. And if there's no overlap, then there is no connection. In order to build that connection, we have to create overlap. There requires some kind of overlap. So if now you and I have a conversation, we get to know each other, or we get put on the same project together, or we go putt-putt golfing together, or whatever that is, we have a shared experience. Now that starts to create some overlap. If I start to learn a bit about you and what you're like outside of the office and who you are as a person, that creates some overlap in our relationship. And it is that overlap, that familiarity, those common interests, those shared experiences that glue us together, that build the foundation for those relationships. Overlap is the key to starting the process of feeling belonging and acceptance. And so as a leader, as a manager, as we're thinking about how we can shape an experience, we need to think first about building overlap with our people. And for all of you, that means sometimes giving your leaders permission to step into those relationships, to get to know their people, to understand who they are beyond what they can do for us at work. Because the more you get to know them, and then the more you share stories so that they can connect with you as a leader, you start to build that overlap. And when you start to build that overlap, you start to build loyalty and connection, and that helps fuel engagement and performance, right? That's the work relationship forming. At the team level, one of the things that I have seen work most effectively with the people I've worked with is a very simple intervention. Again, back to meetings. We're going to meet. Like, we can't break up with meetings for whatever reason. I know many of you, if I asked you to raise your hand and say how many of you are in too many meetings, almost everybody in here would raise your hand. We can't break up with meetings, so let's use meetings to our advantage. And one of the ways that I've seen it used really well is in team meetings, they'll have a question of the day at the beginning of the meeting. And usually it rotates. The best way is it rotates where an employee, one of the people in the meeting, gets to bring a question, and it's just a general interest question. You open the meeting. What's your favorite movie? Where'd you grow up? What's your favorite vacation you've ever been on? What hobby do you have that maybe nobody knows about? Whatever this is, but some kind of innocuous, low stakes, general interest question. You ask that at the beginning of the meeting. People share, and guess what happens? I start to learn about the people across the table or around the meeting or on the video chat. But I also might realize that there's someone working in my team that grew up in the same place I did, or maybe has the same hobby I did, and bam, overlap, instant overlap starts to shape. So acceptance starts with overlap. If you're ready to go back and start engineering more overlap into your relationships and your teams, let me hear you say, oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. 3 is communication. Now, I'm praying that no one in this room is shocked that communication is an important part of a healthy relationship. I know, shocking. Here's what I'll tell you. It's also a central, and you know this, important part of the work relationship. I've been doing employee surveys for a very long time, participating in them, fielding them, analyzing them, and I can tell you over the course of 20 years, I have never seen a single set of employee survey results where the employees said, yeah, we're good on communication, you can back it off a bit. It doesn't happen. There's always a need for more communication, there's always a need to improve communication, and here's why. Let me illustrate with a couple examples. First, how many of you have school-age children like I do? Kids are in school probably today. I see several of you. How many of you have had school-age children in the past? How many of you have heard of school-age children? I think everybody can relate to this. Okay. I have two that are still in school. I have one that's in middle school. And so let's assume that while I'm up here, a voicemail comes in. And I don't see till I get done. So I get done, I check my voicemails, I see a voicemail, and I dial in, and here's what I hear. Mr. Lauritsen, this is Mr. Sortino, the principal at Colton School. I need you to call me back as soon as possible. Here's my number. I look forward to hearing from you. Now, what do we assume about that call? In trouble, that's one option. What is the other thing we assume? Something, sick, hurt, or in trouble usually are one of the threes. We don't go, oh, good, I bet he's getting some kind of citizenship award or academic recognition. That's not where our brains go. Now, for those of you that don't have children, maybe you can relate to this one. Has anybody ever gotten an email like this one from a boss? And you're like, especially in this room, you're like, what are you doing to me? Like, HR invented that trick. What are you doing? You can't pull this on me. Where does our mind go? Getting fired. We don't immediately go, sweet, that raise is finally coming through. Wants to surprise me with the good news. That's not where our minds go. And the thing is, that's not a dysfunction. That is how our brains are wired to work. It's actually part of how we're designed to survive. Our brains are wired. We have this little area called the amygdala that triggers our sort of fight or flight response. Its main purpose is to keep us safe. And what the amygdala does is when it's scanning the world, if it sees an uncertain stimulus or an uncertain thing or something it doesn't know what it is, it assumes it's dangerous. Right? Because that triggers a flight to safety. Just get safe. And that's super helpful if you're out in the woods and it's getting dark and you're a ways from camp and you hear something that you can't identify that could be a predator. Pretty helpful to be like, woo, adrenaline shot, let's go. We should probably get out of here. But the problem is we don't differentiate between that and this email or the call from school. The truth is that what our brains do is that when we are uncertain, we fill in the details. If we don't know what's going on, we write a story. And guess what? We don't write happy endings. We're phenomenally creative at writing the worst case outcomes. When we know this is true about people, about human beings, then we can start to realize there are so many places for uncertainty to exist, right? Employees have so many questions every day in their job experience, things they're wondering about relative to that work relationship and the relationship with their boss and the relationship with their coworkers. And all of them, if I am uncertain, guess what? I write a bad story. And what that means, if you remember anything today, remember the next 3 slides. Uncertainty kills relationships. You all know this. You've probably been through this in any relationship. If I'm not sure where I stand with someone, I'm not sure I can trust you, I'm not sure where we're at, that is problematic. That doesn't lead to happy places. And if uncertainty kills relationships, guess what? Uncertainty also kills engagement. It undermines engagement. And if engagement declines, guess what also goes? Performance. Uncertainty is the enemy we are fighting. If we are to create better work relationships for people, if we want to accelerate performance and engagement, we have to push back on uncertainty. We have to remove as much of it, reduce as much of it as we can. That's what communication is ultimately about. It's a tool. And a lot of times when we think about communication, I think we sell it very short. We think about communication at work. If I asked you why, like what's the purpose of communication at work, you would probably say, well, to share information. True, but that is a very small part of it. The true purpose of communication, if we want to build stronger relationships, is to reduce uncertainty and create clarity. That is the purpose of communication. And the bad news, I guess, as managers and leaders in an organization is that everything you do is communication. What you say, what you do, how you show up, how you respond to things is communication. And so when you wake up in the morning, if there's nothing else you do other than say, I am going to commit myself to reducing as much uncertainty for my people as possible, you'd be well on your way to building stronger relationships. Transformative impact. So what does that look like? Most important thing you can do, check in with your people. Effectively check in with your people. And checking in with your people is the most important tool, skill that a manager and leader can have. Because when you effectively check in with your people, you know what's really going on with them. You'll be able to identify where they're uncertain, where they need clarity, and you can take action. Now notice I say effectively check in. Because a lot of us during the pandemic, the good news is we amped up the check-ins. People started talking about check-ins. They started checking in more. But you know what? The first step of an effective check-in is to ask a great question. And often this is where we go haywire. Because with well intentions or good intentions, we reach out to check in. And what's the most common question we ask when we check in? Right, how you doing? How are you? And what do people say when you ask them, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, fine. How are you? Busy, which translates to, I don't have time for this because I know you don't care anyways. Not a great question. A great question, a great check-in question invites a response that demands a follow-up question. That's what a great question looks like. So let me illustrate. We can take this question that we've been using and make it a great question with a very simple change. How are you today? Scale from 1 to 10. 10 being couldn't be better, 1 being couldn't be worse. Takes no longer to answer that question. 1 syllable, maybe 2, depending on the number. But if you say, I'm a 8, or I'm a 5, or I'm a 2, if you just walked away at that point, that would feel really weird. You have to follow up, right? You have to say, all right, tell me about that. Like, what's going on? Sounds like things are going pretty well. Like, you know, what's working? What's going well? Or if they're a 2, man, that's a cry for help. Great question demands a follow-up. So, of course, you ask the follow-up question, and then you listen. And they will tell you where they have needs, where they're uncertain, what's going on. Then you can take action, provide support. Check-ins. Most important, powerful step you can take to up communication, create clarity. The other thing is just simply to create some shared accountability with your team around communication. Because here's the thing about clarity. Arriving at clarity, reducing uncertainty is not something you can do in a bubble or a silo by yourself. Unless you are a mind reader, you are not going to know where people are uncertain or unclear unless they tell you. And so you have to issue an invitation. It's like, if you are ever unclear, I expect you to ask me. Right? If you don't know what's going on with one of your colleagues, don't assume, ask. Right? Because clarity requires collaboration. No way around it. So are we ready to create greater clarity, to go fight the fight against uncertainty? If you are, say, oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Next up is support. When we are in a positive, healthy relationship, we choose to see the other person or treat the other person with positive regard. So what that means is that when things go wrong, when they fail, when they make a mistake, we assume that, right, we chalk it up to some kind of circumstances or a bad break. We don't assume it's a character flaw. We also tend to assume people have positive intentions. So if they do something that doesn't feel great to us or they make a mistake in our relationship, it makes it easier to forgive and move on and move past it. This is how we treat our best friends and the people that we're in close relationships with. And support's one of those things that you know when you have it and you know when you don't. You can all think of a relationship that you've been in either at work or personally where you felt really supported and one when you did not. And it profoundly affects how you show up in the relationship. When you feel supported, you feel safe. You take risks. You show more of yourself. Support's really important. And sadly, I think support's one of these things that we often give ourselves a bit more credit than we probably should. We think we're more supportive than we are. But I want to illustrate quickly what I mean what support kind of at a maximum level looks like. And I want to share a story. My friend Eric told me this years ago. He had started as a repair or a cable installer for a big cable company. He lives out in the Northwest. And he was fairly early into his job. I think it might have been like his first or his second day that he was out doing solo installs. So he'd been through his training, and then he had kind of shadowed, and he got this install, and it was the last one of the day. He showed up on this job, and it was, I don't even remember what the specifics of it, but he had to get up in the attic and go to work. Well, as he got into this install, it was more complicated than what he expected. And so he was trying to figure it out, and he's working through it, and the day is getting late. It's getting later and later in the afternoon. And he had called his supervisor to get a little help or guidance at one point. But as the day went on, he started to panic because it was his day to pick up his daughter from daycare. And he knew, like, if he wasn't there by a certain time, there's going to be some real consequences for him and all sorts of issues. And so he's panicking, and it's getting later, and he's still struggling. And so he puts a call out to the guy that trained him to ask for some help. And so he called and asked for help and asked how to sort this thing out. And the guy tried to talk him through it. And he thought he was clear. He got off the phone, and he got back to work. Well, while he's getting back to work, and he's frantically trying to get this thing finished, and his adrenaline is going up, and he's getting more nervous by the minute, he hears something outside. And so he gets up, and he goes to the window in the attic, and he looks outside, and he sees not one, not two, but 3 cable trucks arriving outside this house. Now, this story always cracks me up or breaks me up because of when my friend told me this, and he described the relief that came over him when he saw these guys show up. Because what had happened was this guy he called put out a call on the radio and said, hey, we got a new team member who's struggling. If anybody's in the area, he could use a hand. 3 of them showed up. He said, I have never felt so supported in my life. He's like, it was such a relief. And as a result of that, his loyalty and commitment to that team went through the roof. Now, that's support on steroids. Right? Certainly. That is a great example of what support looks like when it's built into how you do things. But I think when we think about support, like I said, we think that we're pretty supportive, but oftentimes I think let's test ourselves quickly. Because I'm guilty of this too. I want you to think about the last time you had an employee that you were working with who was struggling or made some kind of significant mistake in their work. I'm not going to ask you to talk about this out loud, so this is a safe place. You can be honest with yourself. When you heard about this, the first time you heard about this, what was the first things that came to mind? Don't say it out loud. Because it's not a good look usually for most of us, at least me. I know that I haven't, and I do this, I still run into this all the time with my teenage kids. Right? Immediately, the things are like, what were they doing? What were they thinking? Oh my goodness. Like it immediately goes to what? Judgment. Like, why would they do that? That's where we often go. And this is the opposite of support. Right? We go to judgment, and then we start figuring out and diagnosing how they screwed it up and all these different things, right? That's where our brain starts to unfold and unwind and dig in. But that's the opposite of support. If our best friend makes a mistake or screws something up or has a failure, we don't immediately go like, what an idiot. Right? We're like, wow, something must have happened. I wonder what's going on. And we reach out and say, how can I help? What do you need? That is what support looks like. That's what support feels like. So as a manager, as a leader, we've got to learn, discipline ourselves, skip past the judgment. The judgment might still come, but we got to move past that and move to helping. Support is all about helping, getting to that place. And so as a leader, it is moving to help. What do you need? What are you struggling with? Because here's the thing I'll tell you for sure. That individual employee that is struggling, that made the mistake, that failed, I guarantee you, given the option, they would not have chosen that outcome. They would have chosen to do it right the first time. They would have chosen to succeed every time. So something's going on. They need help. Be the person that shows up to help. And on teams, we need to make sure we're finding those people. You have people on your team who are the helpers. They elevate the team. They make everybody better. They show up for people. Their instinct is help. Let's make sure those people are feeling the love. In your shout-outs, you might even ask a question. Who elevated your performance this week? Who helped you have greater impact? Let's call that out. The more love you put on it, the more likely you are to see more of that behavior. So if you're on board, less judging, more helping, let me hear you say, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. We're almost there. Commitment is the fifth element of a healthy relationship. And commitment exists, there's two sides to commitment. There's the side that we are pretty familiar with, which is reciprocity. We need to be mutually committed to one another. Right? I'm committed to, and I will invest in your happiness and well-being. You will invest in my happiness and well-being. I will support your success. You will support my success. There's a reciprocity, a reciprocal arrangement, an agreement. And that also involves kind of a shared accountability. I'm accountable to understanding what you expect so that I can live up to that and vice versa. So there's that reciprocity. That's what we normally think about when we're fostering commitment, or we think about commitment. We need to be in it together. But there's also an element of repair. What happens when things go wrong? What do we do when something goes wrong, small or large? And I think this became really clear to me when my oldest son, I have the three, I talked about two are still in school, my oldest is 25 now. But when he was a teenager, this became crystal clear to me. And he's kind of the one that I think really locked this in for me. Because as a teenager, like all teenagers, he had an extraordinarily high capacity for stupid behavior. How many of you have survived teenagers? Yeah, I see a lot of you. You can attest to that. All of us. We all had it. They have it. It's all there. And my son was extraordinarily gifted at demonstrating these stupid behaviors. And so I had come to expect it, to become the norm, right? So anytime anything would happen, I just kind of came to expect that he had done something stupid, and that was what caused this. And so there was a couple of occasions, I remember one in particular, something had happened, I don't even remember what it was. I assumed he had done something stupid, and I overreacted. Like I was on him immediately. He tried to defend himself. That made me angry, so then I was on him more. He stormed off, went to his room. I find out 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, no, he had no culpability in this particular event. He was without blame. And so I had a choice to make. Right? Do I want to be right and righteous, or do I want to invest in a relationship? And so what I did is I went downstairs and I sat down and I said, I'm sorry. You deserve better than that. I overreacted. I shouldn't have treated you that way. You deserve better than that. I'm going to do better in the future. And he'd say, it's okay. Don't worry about it, as teenagers do. And I wish I could tell you that only happened once. I am not that good. It happened several times. Every time it happened, same thing. I'd go apologize. We'd have that conversation. But you know what happened? Something really cool happened is that what he learned is that when he overreacted, which teenagers occasionally will do, and freaked out on me, he would later then come and sit down and apologize to me. And we made it through high school still with a pretty good relationship. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that we repaired. When things broke, when things fractured, we glued it back together. And there were a lot of fractures, but we glued it back together. And I think this happens at work all the time. Right? Little things get said that get misinterpreted. An email comes out that you could read different ways. It's like a little paper cut, and it's one after the other, and we don't repair it. We let it go, and then it's death by a million paper cuts. And so if we want to be in real relationship, we want to foster a relationship, then we need to be in the business of repairing. And if we're having regular check-ins with people, if we're having our regular one-on-one meetings, if we're talking with our people, we will know when there's been fractures. Or as a manager, when you feel that things didn't go quite right, go own it. Apologize, move on. When an employee gets something wrong or says something wrong, talk it through, forgive them, and move on. Repair it, repair the relationship, and move on. The other thing that we can do is at a team level, if we want to foster this kind of commitment, one of the ways to eliminate some of these fractures becoming big issues is to have more team-based goals and objectives. Because when as a team we're chasing something together, it makes it more likely that we're going to have a reciprocal support agreement. If something goes wrong, we're going to want to repair it, because if we don't and it interferes with performance, everybody is invested in fixing that. So that's one way to really foster greater commitment. So if we're going to go back and build more commitment, let me hear you say, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right, one more ingredient, and I would guess that you have all thought about this already, or at least has crossed your mind. It's maybe the most important and powerful ingredient of a relationship, and it is this: time. My daughter taught me this when she was 7 years old. I was thinking or working on something I was writing about. I think I was writing about sort of the role of love at work, or something like that at the time. So I was thinking about love. And my daughter was walking through, 7-year-old little daughter walking through the room, and I stopped her. I said, Bailey. She stopped and I said, how do you know if someone loves you? And she stopped for a second and looked at me. And she said two things. First thing she said, they give me lots of hugs and kisses. Do not write that one down, please. That is not the HR advice that I am doling out today, or leadership advice. Makes perfect sense for a 7-year-old. Do not write that one down. It's the second thing she said that floored me. I've never forgotten it, stuck with me to this day. She said very simply, they spend time with me. At 7 years old, she intuitively already understood that everybody has this commodity, this super valuable thing called time. Everybody has the same amount of it. And if you pay attention to what they do with it, it says everything about what's important to them. And when they invest that time in me, you know what that means? That means they must care about me. She knew this at 7 years old. We know this in our bones as people. And so using time is one of the most powerful and important things we can do in our organization to foster a better relationship for employees. Time is the currency of relationships. There is no shortcut. If you don't spend time, you cannot make your way to a better relationship without that investment. Time is the currency of relationships. And so when we think about what does that mean? It means we have to dedicate time to be with our people. And this is why over the course of the last 20 years, as I've studied engagement, when I get people that ask me, like, what's your number one tip for employee engagement, to improve engagement? I always ask, do you require your managers to have one-on-one meetings with their people on a regular basis? Or as a leader, are you having regular, like weekly one-on-one meetings with your people? Because if you are not, that's it. Probably no more important tool you can throw than that, because the thing it does is it sends the message to the employee, you are important to me. A lot of things pulling on my time, super busy as a manager, but you know what? I'm always going to set aside time for you. That's how you build relationships. So one-on-one meetings are vital. And the other piece I would say is where time plays in. We talked about building overlap. We've talked about all of these things. As a manager, as a leader, as an organizational leader, you have to make time for those things. This is what makes, we've kind of moved away as we've been chasing efficiency. We've squeezed our organization and tried to squeeze all this extra time out, but you know what is it we need to put some of that time back in. Birthday celebrations, picnics, holiday celebrations, those team meetings where we're just kind of catching up. All of that stuff, we have to create that time so people can connect. Otherwise, relationships cannot form. Time is the currency of relationships. So this is the roadmap. This is the path. If you want to have a more engaged team, if you want to retain your people, if you want to build loyalty, this is the path. We're going to abandon work as a contract, and we're going to remember this always. No matter what we are doing, the relationship always comes first. If we want to build a world-class organization, if we want to retain people, if we want to engage them fully, if we want to elevate them to performing at full potential, the relationship always comes first. first. So as I leave you this morning, one more time I would ask, are you ready to go back to your organization to commit to starting this transformation of treating work as a relationship with the employee? And if you are, let me hear you loud and proud say, "Oh yeah."
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm so grateful to be here with you today. Appreciate it.